Good afternoon, Tuesday, August 6th, 2024, here in Sarasota, Florida, where we are just getting back to normal after Tropical Storm Debbie went through here Sunday and Monday. So definitely shook things up. Some significant flooding in certain parts of town, not here for me and not in my neighborhood per se, but parts of Sarasota definitely went through a little bit of some challenges with the massive amounts of water that came down in this slow moving storm. So, made it through the first one of the year and getting back to normal today. This is video 15 out of 30 in the series called Touching the Soul Through the Heart, Body, and Mind. So, we're at the midway point, which is perfect for the topic and the title of today's video, which I'm going to simply title Focus, Perspective, and Balance. Focus, perspective, and balance. Now, I am choosing these three words. I was guided to talk a little bit about these words and concepts because remember, I do try to connect it minimally to the most previous video. Now, I captured the two most previous videos in one recording, but because I'm trying to keep these to 15 minutes, I split it up into videos 13, 12, and 13, or 13 and 14. Videos 13 and 14 were captured in one recording. Video 14, I talk about a film called American Fiction, and I specifically talk about a quotation that really jolted me. A quotation from one of the characters in the book, in the movie, that really jolted me a little bit to gut check myself, which is always such a fascinating exercise. And it was examining the word and the concept of potential, right? And looking at this idea of potentiality through more of a negative lens and more of a positive lens, meaning looking at seeing the potentiality of something, and through the negative lens, it's looking at and focusing upon it not being good enough and not accepting it because it's not good enough. I would say that is examining from the with the focus upon something from a negative perspective as opposed to looking at potentiality from, say, an athlete's perspective, where, and I used Olympic athletes and professional athletes as an example. We celebrate Olympic and professional athletes, and they wouldn't be where they were in the position of us idolizing and giving them all of our attention, and rightly so, in our celebration of their accomplishments and their abilities, seemingly in some cases inhuman abilities. They wouldn't be in those positions if they didn't have a keen awareness and execution of a constant pursuit of their higher potential. They're constantly self-assessing and pushing the boundaries of what their potentials are as it pertains to their individual sports and their athleticism. So that certainly is looking at reaching potential from a more positive, through a more positive lens, from a more positive perspective. So again, I like to introduce words and concepts and to invite people to go deeper within them, to examine what they bring to their minds immediately. And if you take time to really investigate certain words, you'll find that there are way more ways to examine and see things than what we may see, that we may not recognize in the everyday. I believe this to such an extent that I'm going to take this opportunity to point out my very first, plug here for my book. We're coming up here in 2 days. It's going to be the 1 year anniversary of the publication of my very first, the self-publication of my very first book, the first of what I intend to be many more to come. This first one was very much created as a tool for people. And as it suggests here, it's a book that contains 7 different journaling exercises. And the first one is called the ABCs the ABCs of spirituality. And you would find, if you began, that for each letter of the alphabet, okay, I don't know if you can see that or how clearly, but you will see that for each letter of the alphabet, I identified four words, words or concepts. And then I utilized questions as prompts for anybody who's working through that particular journaling exercise, kind of prompts pertaining to the word, framed in a question to encourage people, to invite people to go a little bit deeper with words and meaning. And I do that and I throw the overall label of ABCs of spirituality because a lot of times the umbrella for me, the spirituality, the big spirituality umbrella, that encompasses more than anything at the general level is a remembrance and an awakening to the fact that things are a lot more than what they appear to be on the surface. Reality is a lot bigger than what we have here in limited earthland. What exists in the unseen world far, far, far outweighs in terms of mass and matter, ironic because it's not really physical by virtue of it being in the unseen world, but there's way more going on in the unseen world than and in the unknown, what we cannot yet know, than our limited knowledge that we've contained in this time space dimension. And we do it with words and concepts, right? And those words and concepts can be highly limiting. And what I have found since my spiritual awakening back at the end of 2010, I have found as a lover of words, I am verbose, I am long winded. I love words. And what I have found is that so much of what I'm working and have been working to convey in this, to try to remind people how much more we're capable of being and doing collectively, it has become unbelievably challenging to utilize the words of the English language for me because I come to an Eckhart Tolle quote from A New Earth, his book called A New Earth. In that book, Eckhart Tolle said, the words are just pointers. They're just pointers. They just sort of get you in the ballpark. From there, we can go a lot deeper and a lot further than in a lot of cases, the very boxed in definition of these things. And when you begin to open your mind a little bit to the fact that nothing in this realm comes into it with inherent meaning, everything just is. We, as the human beings, have given meaning and definition and continue to do so. And then we further bring definition when we all come together to agree to see something in a certain way. We've all come together to agree that this is a pen, that this is a phone, that this is a checkbook. Okay, it's like those are collective things, but inherent in and of itself, if you were a being from another planet, an alien being, and you came down, it wouldn't be like, oh yeah, this is a pen. We have come together to make up the word for it and the definition for what this is. It's not inherently a pen. Okay. And again, this starts to, for people that are more black and white, like my Taurus parents, they start to lose, my mom's head starts to spin when I talk about most anything in my world, because she's so black and white. She has a really hard time with metaphysical concepts. She has a really hard time getting out of the box, a really hard time to opening up her mind to the fact that things are a lot more than what we've been conditioned to in our little box of little earth reality. Okay, so coming back to the words of focus, perspective, and balance. My goodness, these are important concepts. And I want to just, how you look at something, the focus. If you think of a camera lens, you think of, if you aim a camera out anywhere, there are really an infinite number of things that you could focus upon, right? Especially if you get into the nuanced atomic level, infinite number of things. But then if you zoom in, you're going to focus upon something much smaller within that grander picture. And then even when you zoom in and bring the focus in on something, if you're looking at this something from this side of it, it's going to look differently than from this side, then from this side, then from this side. So the perspective that you take matters. And what you would describe, how you would describe it with a limited perspective could be entirely different than how you would describe it from a completely different angle. The focus is the same, right? You're up close on it, but depending on what perspective that focus comes upon, you could be just, you could seemingly see, you could seem like you were describing something completely different when in actuality you're describing the same thing, or the same item, if you will. Reality is like that. Stories are like that. Situations and events are like that. I'm going to say damn near almost everything in this time-space dimension is entirely about what are you focusing upon, from what perspective are you taking that focus. And that's why the media has become such a nonsense, divisive thing, because people are taking it and they're almost taking it like that's the only way to look at something, that you're not taking into consideration the context that surrounds it. You're not taking into consideration how it's focusing on one part of something. You're not taking into consideration the perspective. And then further, when we look at how media and how things are delivered to us, everything's an elevator pitch. Give it to me in 3 fucking words. 3 words? You're going to think you're going to be able to accurately describe anything in an elevator pitch when you take into consideration there's no room to have time to discuss, hey, what focus? What are you focusing upon? What's the greater context? What perspective are you taking and looking at it? We don't make time for any of that. Yet everybody is running around, not everybody, because I certainly don't, but the vast majority of the collective is running around with this sort of information that they think is true with a capital T, when in actuality, it may be true, but oftentimes in a best case scenario, it's only a partial truth. And in a lot of case scenario, again, it's depending on the perspective and the focus that determines whose truth, what are you focusing upon? Whose perspective is this coming from? Like it puts everything into question when you begin to really examine things and start to, stop taking for granted what's just being spoon-fed to us in all this nonstop bombardment of information. And and again, I'm sharing and talking about all of this because a big part of what I'm trying to be an example of, what I'm with my work in my life, what I am living, is to encourage us to be our own deciders. Turn off the news. Let your experiences, your direct experiences, inform you way more than something outside of you giving the information to you. Because now more than ever, I would humbly suggest that we cannot blindly trust anything coming to us. It behooves us to go dig deeper. And who's got the time to dig deeper to see what is the underlying motivation for the focus and perspective that's being delivered to you? And finally, as part of this, I don't know how this will come across. I don't really care. I'm just talking about 3 words and concepts that I believe personally are extremely important to examine: focus, perspective, and now balance. So here's the last piece of it that I think is one of the most highly beneficial, most mature exercises we as adults could begin to undertake. So I suggested earlier that we live in, and I don't think there's going to be much debate to this, we live in this world of duality, a dualistic world where everything is on the spectrum right now, and you're either on this side or you're on this side of the spectrum. And even though the reality is most fall in the middle, we live in the world that is forcing the black and white, when in fact, almost everything is really gray. Okay? One of the great exercises, and I'm going to use politics because I don't identify on either side. I haven't identified on either side in 20 years. Yet I have found that I piss people off, perhaps even more so than I did when I was on one side versus the other. I piss people more off now when I say, I'm not on either side. I'm not feeding it. I'm not going there with you, because I'm going to tell you both of them are same. They're the same corrupt coin. They're the same bought system. They are no different. To think that one is better or different than the other is completely, and I think there's plenty of evidence, objective evidence to demonstrate this. The conflict of interest is clear. Okay, but using it as an example, because I don't identify and couldn't give two shits about either side, I really try to rise above it. They both kind of equally still trigger me, so I still have work to do to not be triggered by the whole thing and be triggered negatively by people that still buy into it. Clearly, I still am. But one of the great things that I have the ability to do now that I didn't when I identified on one side is that I can look at it and I can focus on XYZ, fill in the blank of any issue or whatever, or an opinion that the collective Republican sees or the collective Democrats. The whole thing is so crazy to me that we think that we can isolate anything so clearly to be one side or the other, and that there's just two groups that represent the infinity that is each individual person, like the infinite things that make us up. I cannot believe we're still believing that two groups that have actually switched ideologically multiple times. What used to be represented by Democrat is now Republican. Like it's just nuts to me. But what I'm able to do is I can stand on an issue and I can see it from the Republican side and I can see it from the Democratic side. And because I don't give a shit, I don't identify with either side, that means that I'm more able to be this unbiased, balanced fulcrum point in the middle. And I just think that it's one of the most powerful exercises we can do. If politics is too hard, take something else. Oh gosh, I don't even have, under pressure here, trying to think of other issues, and I'm sitting here saying everything's one side or the other, and I'm just trying to think. I'm trying to think of, I mean, I don't want to, invariably I'm going to come up with all sorts of triggering issues. But it's basically take an opinion of, let's take an opinion of having technology in society and no technology in society. And looking at that, let's look at the opinion of, uh, uh, I'm drawing a blank on other examples right now, but suffice to say that it is an exceptional exercise to learn how to be on one side if you are, but not if you want to identify on one side. That's all well and good, but how great would it be to be able to have an opinion on something and not be tied to it and be able to see and appreciate and not take it personally if somebody else has a different opinion. So yeah, you understand, and by virtue of going through that exercise, you can kind of be at this balance point and sort of turn yourself 360 degrees. That's the even better exercise, is to turn yourself and to be able to see something from the whole circle. And then that better, once you experience and try to see something from multiple angles, you might find that it's kind of hard to choose one side or the other, because you begin to appreciate it from its more complete picture. And then you're more able to be in this balance point. And the balance fulcrum point, I don't know. I think that place is a lot more interesting than the divisiveness of one side or another. So I kind of stumbled at the end of this. I'm still out of whack from the storm happening. It tends to be a little anxiety riding for me. For a lot of people, and it definitely threw my momentum off. So and I had a house project that was scheduled for today. So right out of the storm, I had to stay home all day while these guys were putting hurricane clips on my roof. The last and final thing I can do to try to make the house as secure as it can be during storm season, so that my anxiety is a little bit less. In any case, I stumbled towards the end, but I hope that the main gist gets across. The focus and perspective of something is absolutely integral in terms of taking in information, and it behooves us to ask that question, if only silently to ourselves. What is the focus? Try to pan back on the other pieces, and I encourage people to try to see things and examine things from other perspectives than where they find themselves at. You may in the end come back and decide you still want to stand on the side of something where you were to begin with, but the exercise of seeing it from around, the exercise of trying to find that fulcrum point, I don't think it's an exercise that hurts anybody. Certainly not individually, and absolutely does not hurt the collective. Because one of the things, in my opinion, we need to mature into is to really learn how to respect others who see things from a different focus and with a different perspective. So thanks for sticking with me, and we'll talk again tomorrow. Good night.